The Ebola crisis has gotten so serious, President Obama canceled a fundraiser and a campaign rally today to meet with advisors on the outbreak. If things get much worse, word is he might even cancel a golf game. All right, it's not very funny, though, folks. I think many Americans have lost confidence in our government's ability to keep us safe. Stock market is plunging. An infected nurse flew just days after working on an Ebola victim. Tom Duncan, the CDC director, says he'd wish he had done more, but now Tom Frieden is trying to convince the American people that they have this under control. Watch.
Our information is clear and correct. We know how Ebola spreads. We know how to stop it. We know what is happening. It spreads by direct contact. And, you know, sometimes more isn't better. You put on more layers, you put on more things. They're harder to get on. They're harder to get off. You may, yes, really, it may end up putting you at higher risk. You would go into an infected Ebola patient's room without covering your head, with only wearing one pair of gloves and with your feet exposed. You would do that? Absolutely.
So I share some of the same concerns that the majority of the American people have. The government doesn't really know what Ebola is or what it could become. But don't worry, the CDC keeps telling us Ebola is really hard to catch, really hard. So, Bob, you know, every day something new happens. Someone gets infected, and they're hazmated up, but they're still getting infected.
Well, I mean, first of all, there's not that many that we have so far. And secondly, the idea of calling for the director of the CDC's job is just ridiculous in the middle of this crisis. Look, it is new to the United States, Ebola. I think they've done a pretty good job, but except the real problem was in the hospital in Dallas, in the Presbyterian Hospital, when they allowed Duncan in there in the emergency room. He was the 5th patient in line. They took his bio stuff and they put it in the pneumatic tube. I mean, that's not the problem with the CDC. That's the problem with the protocols of the hospitals.
Can I just read, rebutting what you just said? This is Frieden's quote. "I wish we had put a team like this on the ground the day the first patient was diagnosed. That may have prevented this infection."
Why didn't they?
Why didn't they?
Well, I don't know. I don't know the answer to that.
So you're saying it's not his fault?
Well, I don't think it's his fault that this thing spread in that hospital. I think it was the hospital's protocol that was the problem.
But aren't they following protocols that have been handed down by the CDC?
Obviously not. That's the problem.
Once they had a case that was confirmed to be Ebola. The point is they just need to tighten this up because it's sloppy.
Well, every hospital needs to do that. But the CDC, the government, the federal government can't come into every hospital and make them tighten up their protocol.
Yeah, they can.
Why? How?
Yeah, they can,
There's
Bob.
thousands and thousands of hospitals around the country.
It's a serious enough issue that, in fact, they can. And that's why we're listening to these press conferences from Frieden and listening to what the CDC has to say. And that's why they're saying they're going to put a fast team on the ground to be able to go in and deal with the situation. Right. They have the ability to shut this down, so do it.
One of the most egregious things that happened, Dana, is that we found out today that Amber Vinson, the second Ebola victim, the one that worked on Thomas Eric Duncan in Dallas, was able to fly a couple of days after Duncan died. Now, she wasn't on a list. She wasn't on a watch list. She wasn't on a no-fly list. She wasn't on a quarantine list. What are they doing?
That's where it seems that the government response really broke down, because if Ebola were that easy to catch, then everybody on that plane would be at risk, or there'd be hundreds and hundreds more people that already have Ebola, and that is not happening, so I think we need to keep that in mind. But I think that the government will have to admit that they did something wrong there, and that protocols, it sounds like, because they weren't wearing the head coverings initially when dealing with him, then that is a breach of protocol. And that gets me to the Nurses Association, the union, the Nurses Union. Their statement today is absolutely devastating for the administration. They are demanding more training, more information, and the administration has even said the world hasn't been doing enough on Ebola. I think that means that the United States has to lead. Back in May or June, the Doctors Without Borders and others, World Health Organization, the UN, was raising the alarm about this, and the administration was slow. I think on that point they are very vulnerable, that they could have been talking to the nurses and the hospitals all across America, because even if there were a travel ban from those 3 countries, it doesn't mean that a person in that country who knows my best chance of survival of getting to the United States would be for me to leave Liberia, go to this country where there isn't a travel ban, and then travel. I mean, I don't know if they can actually ever try to wall off this problem unless they try to solve it there. So I think the administration's biggest vulnerability is on how long it took them to act, and then having to basically revise their story now.
They weren't ready for game day.
They also added that there was, quote, blood, vomit, and diarrhea-soaked hazardous materials piled up to the ceiling. I mean, CDC literally told us we have protocols in place for if there were going to be a case on U.S. soil. doesn't seem like they had
protocols in place, but hospitals have to take those protocols and make them work.
But they didn't seem to have them, Bob. There's hospitals after hospitals, nurses, unions telling us that the protocols weren't in place. They weren't well trained, well versed out to avoid 2 people being infected so far.
I want to comment on you. Let Greg get in here, then I'll comment.
There's actually some good news here. Number one, the health worker that was infected had been treating Mr. Duncan, and for 2 days they didn't have hazmat suits, which is bad and wrong and a breach of protocol. However, those are the people that got infected. Meanwhile, there are 48 people out there who are asymptomatic, who are out in the community, who have not developed symptoms in this window, this symptom window. What does that tell you? The most obvious thing, that when you are treating somebody and you're not adequately prepared with a heavily infectious disease with effusive secretions, you are more likely to get infected. That is what happened. This is what is a tragedy, but it is also good news, because what it is telling you is that the only way that this can get infected is if you are treating a very sick patient and you are not properly covered. The other good news is, the great story here is the nurse, Nina Pham. She's doing well after getting a blood transfusion from the cured doctor, Kent Brantley. Yeah. So thank God that we did the right thing and we flew him here and we got him the best damn treatment so that now his blood is saving the lives. If we had left him in Africa, he would be dead. And I'd like to add, God bless Shepard Smith for coming out and saying what everybody needs to hear, that there's nothing good to come from raising panic and telling everybody that they're all going to die. You're going to die from 100 different things before you even get close to an infected patient. This is not a contagious disease. It is highly infectious when you are treating it, and you are breaching a protocol when you're treating it. These people were not prepared. We must improve on their protection, and that will help this. We are the best at doing this. Unfortunately, we are failing right now on protecting the nurses.
Well, let me just say, it's far be it for me to want to take on the unions. I don't like to do that. But in this case, the nurses knew that this problem existed. They knew what the protocols were, and clearly now they're saying, hey, you're putting us at risk. They're the trained professionals. They're the ones who have to deal with this.
No, they didn't have enough hazmat suits.
They didn't have the material.
They didn't have them for 2 days.
But if they didn't have enough hazmat suits, why did their hospitals didn't have?
Can I just ask you something? So if 2 nurses got it because they didn't have hazmat suits, and these 2 people have traveled, one of them on an airplane to Cleveland or from Cleveland back to Dallas, how many more people may have it? That's not the issue. That's
not the question. The question is, what do they define monitoring? If monitoring allows a nurse to fly, that's not monitoring. Nobody asked about her flying because we assumed she wasn't. That's an issue. But I would not instill panic among people on planes and say, oh my God, how many other people are going to get it? You have to be in direct contact without protection with somebody who's symptomatic, who has effusive secretion.
Right, and he's saying that violated the controlled movement protocol, which means you're only allowed to, if you think you even might be symptomatic, go on a chartered plane, go in your own car, or stay in your own home. You're not allowed to go on any public means of transportation. That was the latest update.
And that was why they quarantined Dr. Nancy Snyderman of NBC News when she came back, that she's and her crew are being asked to keep themselves.
But I agree with you, Eric. Dr. Siegel talks about this idea of fear guides. This is somebody that you trust when there is panic. We don't have a fear guide. We don't have somebody that can come in and tell us like things are going to be okay. Instead we have a bumbling character. Frieden wasn't so bumbling at the beginning, but he seems to bumble more. We need to find somebody that you can actually trust, that makes you say, okay, here's the actual possibility of what can happen, and here's how we're going to fix it. We don't have that yet.
That was the kind of guy that Fauci is on AIDS. Remember Fauci?
So you want an Ebola czar?
Can I just point out the reason why we're taking that shot of the White House is President Obama may actually make an announcement in the next few minutes. If he does, we're going to break.
Can I give some background on that?
Yeah, please.
So this is what I think is happening in the cabinet room right now. So as you mentioned in your opening, President Obama canceled his 2 fundraisers today, which is, I think, the absolute right thing to do. And he called a cabinet meeting. Remember, though, in the fundraising piece, it's not that the Democrats aren't going to get the money because the checks are pre-written. He just isn't going to the event. But again, still the right thing to do. But what happens in a cabinet meeting like that is that you have all these different entities. And you think, why do you have to bring all these entities together? It's because I think they're being smart enough now to say, okay, we need Veterans Affairs here because if somebody goes to if a vet comes into a Veterans Affairs hospital, do they have the protocols, or are we going to have the similar problem that the nurses union is saying that they have there? Department of Justice has to be involved because they have to be prepared for any possible security concerns and retaliation against people, which could actually happen. You have to plan for that. DHS has to be involved, Homeland Security because of immigration and border enforcement, education because of schools, HHS because of all of the doctors. It goes on and on. So I think they're really smart to have that. I do absolutely think that the president will try to speak today just with some authority and try to be, even though he cannot be completely, he will try to be that fear guide.
So Ed Henry pointed something out today that the president did go back to the White House. He canceled the fundraisers to do this. In other crises or other major events, he chose not to do that. He said by going back to the White House, it instilled fear in the American people or in the world in some cases. But now, does this add to the fear?
It's a catch-22. It's a catch-22. If he doesn't show up, then this table will say, where the hell is he? And then if he does show up, we go, oh, man, we're all going to die. So there's no way he can win on this, I think.
That's exactly right. And the other thing to keep in mind here, let me be a little crass here. This is 3 weeks before the elections. And if you're sitting there and you're the political director in the White House and you say, now, what's the right move? Should we have a fundraiser while this thing's going on, or should we have him come back and have a meeting?
Yeah.
I think on balance, I would have him come back and have a meeting.
He did a fundraiser the day after Benghazi. He did a fundraiser. You know, there were 2 or 3 other times where
not to mention golfing after the beheading.
Golfing, literally in the while the family of the beheaded American was talking on the microphone, he was golfing at the very same time.
I think this, with all due respect to that place, this is far more serious than Benghazi ever was.
What?
I think the Ebola.
We're not talking. We're talking about after the beheading and he went golfing.
Can I get to this soundbite? And first of all, I want to point out that you have your cigar in your.
Oh, sorry.
The travel
that's deadlier.
Much like British Airways did back in August. I thought it was a smart move then. I still kind of do. I still do, actually. The CDC begs to differ.
Why not put a travel ban in place until we've shorn up the system?
If we do things that are going to make it harder to stop the epidemic there, it's going to spread to other parts of Africa.
How is it going to make it harder to stop it over there?
Because you can't get people in and out.
Why can't we have charter flights?
In and out. You know, charter flights don't do the same thing commercial airlines do.
What do you mean? They fly in, they fly out.
If we isolate these countries, what's not going to happen is disease staying there. It's going to spread more all over Africa and will be at higher risk.
But Greg, how do we avoid another Thomas Eric Duncan coming?
Well, okay. Well, the issue with Thomas Eric Duncan is he's like you, Eric, a hero. You saved Bob Beckel's life that day when he was choking, and Thomas Duncan tried to save a woman who was dying. So he gave his life. In this case, there's an inherent contradiction here. You can't have. It doesn't have to be all or nothing. You don't need a travel ban. You don't need an entire travel ban. You can allow in and out travel.
What about limiting certain visas? Then,
yeah, I mean that's why I don't know why they have to say all or nothing.
But here's what they're saying. They're saying if you ban travel to and from these 3 countries, Sierra Leone, Guinea, and Liberia, you're increasing the chances for it to spread in those countries. And I just, for the life of me...
But of course that is true.
This is what Dana said here about this. You can fly out of any of those countries to Europe and from Europe into the United States. I mean, you know,
There's ways to circumvent
this. If you have a Sierra Leone passport, you don't get admittance.
Meaning if you have a stamp from there saying that you stopped in there during this time, then you wouldn't be allowed.
You originate there or you stop there. You don't get in. I'm just trying to figure out...
The thing is, Duncan came from Brussels.
Right.
Would he have been able to, and also he was asymptomatic, so at that point maybe not. But I mean, I don't see why you can't. I mean, you can't do a partial ban and still let people go in.
I think the other thing is we've lost track. We're talking about 2 people who are being treated with the best possible care in America when the World Health Organization said that they expect 10,000 more cases a week all throughout Africa. You are not going to be, I do not think you're going to be able to stop this in terms of a travel ban. You might be able to slow it down slightly, but you're actually, and I believe that they are correct, that it could actually exacerbate the problem there and then spread it and make it even more dangerous for people. I don't think it's the right move at this time.
You know who's going to be, do you know who's going to be proven right, though, in all of this? Muslims. It's the burqa. Protects you. It protects you.
On that note, we're going to leave it right there. We're still